Simple lang naman, siguro tinatanong mo, paano nanalo Israel doon, di ba? Siyempre, ang kakampi ng Israel, sino? Ang Diyos. Hello guys! My name is Adrian Milag at first of all gusto ko ulit magpasalamat sa pag-visit mo dito sa aking YouTube channel. At kung first time mo dito sa aking channel, make sure na mag-subscribe ka at click mo yung notification bell button sa baba ng video na to kung sa tingin mo na makakatulong sa'yo yung mga information na share ko sa'yo dahil dito sa channel na to marami pa akong i-share sa'yo ng mga content na alam ko na mabe-bless ka. At isa sa focus ng content ko is yung palakasin yung faith mo. Kasi kung mapapansin mo yung mga content ko dito, it's all about supernatural story, it's all about miracles. Kasi alam mo sa panahon ngayon, because of this pandemic and crisis, maraming mga tao ngayon is yung hopeless, nawawala ng pag-asa. Diba? Minsan nakakalimutan nila yung mga nangyari in the past. Dahil doon is nakukonsume sila ng fear and worry and anxiety at marami ang nagsusuicide talaga at medyo tumataas ngayon ang suicide rate because of this pandemic in this crisis. Kaya ang goal ko is bawat tao na makakapanood ng video na to is after nila matapos tong vlog ko is magkaroon sila ng hope and inspiration na magpatuloy sa buhay at mas magtiwala sa Diyos. Kasi alam mo, minsan kailangan lang din natin ng reminder. Ano yung ginawa ni Lord dati? Na si Lord is gumagalaw simula noon hanggang ngayon and even in the future. At yun ang goal ng vlog na to is to give you those information at ipaalala sa'yo na meron tayong Diyos na makapangyarihan at meron tayong Diyos na walang imposible sa Kanya. Okay? And today, I will share to you isa sa nangyari sa 1967 war between Israel and all the Arab nation. Okay? Para tong David and Goliath. Okay? So, actually, 53 years anniversary na to simula nung nanalo ang Israel dito sa mga higanteng Arab nation na to. Imagine that, guys. Nag-iisa lang ang Israel. At tinawag din tong 6 days of miracle. Kasi natapos tong war na to in 6 days. Ang kalaban ng Israel, isa-isayin ko mga Arab nation. Kasi galit na galit talaga ang mga Arab nation dito sa Israel. Imagine niyo parang katiting lang ang Israel sa mapa. Lahat yun napapalibutan sila ng mga Arab nation. Pero until now, Israel is still standing. Israel is still nandun at hindi sila ma-defeat ng mga kalaban. Ito yung mga nakalaban nila which is Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, Lebanon, Algeria, Kuwait, Libya, Morocco, Pakistan, Flow, Sudan, and Tunisia. Okay? Grabe to guys. Biruin nyo ang tank ng Israel is 800 lang. Okay? Samantalang yung mga kalaban din ng Israel, 2,504. Yung jet plane ng Israel is 300 lang. Samantala, yung kalaban nila is 957. Okay? Tapos yung soldier ng Israel is 100,000 lang. Samantalang yung kalaban nila is 547,000. They were vastly outnumbered. But Israel won the 1967 war in just 6 days. This is amazing how God really protect Israel. Simple lang naman, siguro tinatanong mo, paano nanalo Israel doon, di ba? Siyempre, ang kakampi ng Israel, sino? Ang Diyos. Never iiwan ng Diyos ang Israel dahil yan ang chosen people of God. At diyan nagumpisa ang lahat. Okay, kahit medyo naligaw ang mga Israelita, magiging faithful, at God will always be faithful on Israel. And God will always be faithful on His promise, especially sa mga chosen people niya na Israel. Siguro para mas lalo tayong matuto dito, paano nanalo ang Israel, meron akong ipapanood sa inyo na mini documentary about the 6 days of miracle. Okay? So stay tuned.
News brings you the latest incident to upset the chancelleries of
The Muslim nations in the Middle East would not accept Israel's existence since its founding in 1948. They began amassing huge amounts of sophisticated weaponry and lobbying for the implementation of boycotts, divestment, and sanctions against the Jewish state. On the 15th of May 1967, on Israel's Independence Day, a 3-week period began, which was one of the most tense and fearful periods in Israel's history. In direct contravention of international agreements, Egyptian leader Jamal Abdel Nasser removed the UN peacekeeping forces and began moving tens of thousands of soldiers and hundreds of tanks into what was the demilitarized Sinai Peninsula towards Israel's southern border. Egypt also blockaded the Straits of Tiran, an open international waterway which was essentially a declaration of war. Israel turned to the nations of the world, primarily to the United States, for assistance against Egyptian aggression, but somehow all Western countries decided to remain neutral. Very quickly it became apparent that the promises were all but forgotten. Israel, with 2.5 million Jews, was left alone to face the might of the Arab nations. Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, and Lebanon formed a military alliance and began moving forces into Jordan towards Israel's borders. When the Arab countries realized that the world had abandoned Israel, many other Muslim countries were openly calling for the destruction of Israel. The will and means to murder millions of Jews were evident. Top IDF commanders expressed their concerns at the high price Israel was liable to pay in a war with the Arab world. Some military experts projected a toll between 20 and 100,000 lives. Israel prepared cemeteries all over the country, ready to accommodate many expected victims. Massive parks were prepared in Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and other cities in case the cemeteries would have no more space. World governments, instead of defending Israel's right to exist, warned Israel continuously not to attack. However, the people of Israel had no choice but to go to war, to defend their country and their very existence. At 7:15 a.m. on June 5th, 1967, the IDF launched Operation Moked, Focus. Almost the entire Israeli Air Force was dispatched in a daring mission. Only 12 planes stayed behind. The risk of this operation was extraordinary, as the fighter pilots flew at an unprecedented low altitude of less than 20 meters above the ground. Egypt had the most advanced ground-air missile defense systems in the Middle East. Most of the Israeli jets were old and outdated French planes. If the Israeli jets would have been detected, many would have fallen, and Israel would have been left with practically no air force. And then, a miracle occurred. The most advanced Russian MiG jets that patrolled the airspace along the borders between Egypt and Israel were, for that one critical hour, grounded. Incredibly, at that very same time, the top commanders of Egypt, Jordan, and Iraq flew together to observe the Egyptian forces invading Sinai. The Egyptian officers had ordered all anti-aircraft units not to fire unless given a direct order as long as they were in flight. This created total confusion on the Egyptian ground as Israel struck exactly in that window of time. By 7:45 a.m., the high hand of Providence resulted in the Israeli Air Force reaching all the Egyptian airfields without even one plane being detected. More than 200 Egyptian planes, almost half of Egypt's fleets, were almost instantaneously destroyed, also bombing the runways and making impotent the mightiest air force in the Middle East. General Moti Hod, commander of the Air Force, said, "In my wildest dreams, I never would have conceived of such an incredible success." A second wave of Israeli jets were directed to Cairo to confront the remains of the Egyptian Air Force. And here, another miracle occurred, no less miraculous than the first. Even though Israel had lost the element of surprise and the anti-aircraft systems were operating with full capacity, Egypt was only able to hit one Israeli plane. The Israeli Air Force went on to destroy a total of more than 300 Egyptian planes, and every airfield in Egypt was neutralized. It was nothing less than a military miracle, seemingly impossible. And then, another miracle occurred. It was as if God hardened the heart of the Egyptian President Nasser, who continuously gloated about his glorious military victory over Israel. In the Arab media, President Nasser spoke of the end of Israel's Air Force and of the Egyptian tanks on their way to Jerusalem. Jordan, Syria, and Iraq believed these bombastic statements and wanted to join him in the great victory against the Jews. All the Arab air power struck simultaneously on multiple fronts. In almost any other scenario, Israel would not have been able to respond as quickly as it did. The timing was seemingly orchestrated to position Israeli jets exactly where they should be. Not in 6 days, but in 6 hours, the war was won.
A biblical prophecy comes to pass as the forces of Israel sweep on in an astonishing triumph of strategy. After achieving air supremacy, her forces thrust like an avenging sword at the very heart of Arab self-confidence.
And then, perhaps, the greatest miracle of all, a miracle Israel never expected: Jerusalem. Again, it seemed as though it was a divine appointment in time. Jerusalem was to be restored to the Jewish people. After 2,000 years, the enemies of Israel had twice as many soldiers as we did, 3 times as many planes, 4 times as many tanks. The odds were stacked against us on every military front. The love of Israel, self-sacrifice, and courage of the Israeli soldiers, combined with divine guidance and assistance, made these miracles possible. Yitzhak Rabin, then the Minister of Defense, was given the honor of giving the war its name. He chose the 6-day war we're calling the 6 days of creation, as Israel too was created with the liberation of Jerusalem. As the center of gravity of the Jewish people has now returned to the land of our fathers, the Torah center of the world has once again returned to Jerusalem. The chief rabbinate of the State of Israel has established the 28th of Iyar, a day of Hallel and Hodaya, praise and thanks for the salvation of our people and the liberation and return of our capital, Jerusalem. Jews in Israel and in every country in which they reside come together in prayer and celebration. Similar to Hanukkah and Purim, it sometimes takes many years for the miracles to be fully recognized and celebrated. The Mizrahi World Movement is involved in massive community-wide celebrations across the globe, from London to Los Angeles, from Melbourne to Johannesburg to Chicago and Toronto. For 2,000 years, our hope never died. Our faith as a people never wavered. Wherever Jews were and whenever they prayed facing Jerusalem. Whatever happened the night before, whether it was the Crusades, the Inquisition, Muslim oppression, or Nazis in Germany, the next morning a Jew would wake up, dust himself off, put on his talit, face Jerusalem, and pray to come home, knowing somehow, some way, God would bring us back. This is our greatest celebration. To be alive in this generation where the prayers of our fathers and mothers have finally been answered, to be alive and to take part in Jewish destiny. To experience miracles of divine providence, bayamim hahem, bazman hazeh, like in those days, but in our time.
So yun guys, grabe no? Talagang God really protecting Israel. God is really with Israel na tinalo nila yung Arab nation at they were outnumbered. Pero God is good, God is great. God really loved the nation of Israel. Okay, kaya patuloy natin ipagdasal ang nation ng Israel. Alam nyo, ako everyday pinagdadasal ko ang Israel. Okay, kasi may promise sa Bible. Ano ba yung promise? I will bless those who will bless you. I will curse those who will curse you. Okay, sinabi ng Diyos yun kay Abraham. Tama. And Israelita si Abraham. Those who are in favor of Israel, favor na rin sa'yo ang Diyos. And those who will persecute and, di ba, curse Israel, Diyos ang mga kalaban mo. Okay, hindi ako nagsabi niyan. Bible. Okay, at pwede mo pa yung i-check, okay, kung medyo skeptic ka, pwede mong i-check sa Bible, di ba? Okay, so pwede ka ba mag-comment sa baba ng video na to? Naniniwala ka ba na Diyos ang gumalaw sa laban na to, itong 1967 war? Okay, so I love to see your comment. So that's it. Thank you for watching this video. I hope na na-bless at na-inspire ka dito sa aking vlog. Make sure na i-like mo at mag-comment ka sa baba ng video na to at mag-subscribe ka sa aking YouTube channel para lagi kang updated sa mga bagong vlog na gagawin ko. At huwag mo din kakalimutan na i-like ang aking page. So this been Adrian Milag, encouraging you to live your life to the fullest. God bless you more abundantly.